Could you imagine the son you raised, the boy you held in your arms, the one you thought would carry your legacy, facing the possibility of jail? It's almost unthinkable. And yet, today, that unthinkable is no longer hypothetical. King Charles, a man who has spent decades navigating the dizzying maze of royal duties, public scrutiny, and family loyalty, has finally made a decision that shocks the entire world. He is taking legal action against his own son, Prince Harry. And the stakes are higher than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began quietly, with whispers behind palace walls, cryptic notes passed to trusted aides, and murmurs in the royal press that something was brewing. For years, Harry had been a source of both pride and concern for the monarchy. Charismatic, outspoken, and increasingly independent, he carved his own path, leaving tradition and protocol behind. But no one, not even the most informed palace insiders, could have predicted that his actions would provoke the father he once idolized to resort to a legal showdown. Why now? Why would a father risk the public spectacle of taking his son to court, knowing the intense media frenzy it would unleash? The answer lies in a series of events so intricate, so calculated, that they read like a thriller. Hidden documents, secret recordings, and private communications paint a picture of betrayal, manipulation, and decisions that many considered unthinkable for a royal. And as the world watches, one question looms large. How far is a king willing to go to protect his crown, his family, and his legacy? The first inkling of this crisis came when palace staff noticed a subtle but unmistakable shift in the dynamic between Charles and Harry. Meetings that once were cordial and fatherly turned tense and deliberate. Private conversations were laced with frustration and veiled warnings. Sources close to the family reported that the king, usually measured and composed, began showing signs of impatience and even anger, a rare display that suggested something deeper was stirring beneath the surface. For the public, Harry's narrative had long been dominated by his media appearances, interviews, and public engagements. He spoke candidly about his struggles, his mental health, and his vision for a life outside the confines of the traditional royal role. Many admired his honesty, seeing him as a beacon of transparency within a centuries-old institution shrouded in secrecy. But what the public did not see were the private actions, the behind-the-scenes maneuvers, and the strategic decisions that allegedly led his father to conclude that legal intervention was necessary. Imagine, for a moment, the complexity of this situation. A father, a monarch with the weight of a nation on his shoulders, now faces a personal dilemma. The son he loves has crossed boundaries that he cannot ignore. The king's advisors, legal team, and trusted confidants were pulled into emergency meetings. There were discussions about precedent, about the potential fallout in the media, about the implications for the monarchy's reputation on a global scale. Every option was weighed, every risk considered. And yet, the king's decision became clear: action must be taken. Some insiders suggest that the tipping point came with the discovery of documents and evidence that allegedly implicated Harry in actions the royal family considered both personal and legal violations. Letters, emails, and recordings, some hidden for months, were suddenly brought to the attention of Charles. And what these files contained was nothing short of explosive. Allegedly, there were communications that not only contradicted Harry's public statements, but also suggested that he had acted in ways that jeopardized family relationships, financial agreements, and royal reputation. At this point, it is important to ask, what kind of evidence could compel a father to pursue legal action against his own child? The answer is both simple and complex. On one hand, it involves matters of trust, loyalty, and personal boundaries, values that transcend even the strictures of royal protocol. On the other hand, it involves legal and financial ramifications that cannot be ignored. When those two elements collide, the result is a perfect storm, one that the monarchy had hoped to avoid for years. And yet, the story doesn't end with documents and internal deliberations. The emotional weight of this situation cannot be understated. Family dinners, once filled with laughter and conversation, became strained and awkward. Words were exchanged in whispers, in corridors, in rooms where no cameras could capture the tension. The love between father and son, long considered unshakable, was now being tested in the most public of ways. Observers can only speculate about the conversations that took place behind closed doors, but the evidence of strain was visible to anyone paying close attention. Here is a truth that few people outside the palace truly understand. Royalty is not just a title. It is a life governed by duty, tradition, and the constant scrutiny of the world. Every decision carries weight, and every misstep is magnified. For King Charles, the choice to pursue legal action was not merely about punishment. It was about accountability, about setting boundaries, and about protecting an institution that has survived for centuries. For Harry, the decision to defy protocol and forge his own path, however well-intentioned, has brought him into direct conflict with a father who is both sovereign and parent. Now, let us consider the role of the public in this unfolding drama. Social media has exploded with speculation. News outlets, both tabloid and mainstream, have dissected every statement, every gesture, every rumored action. Fans and critics alike have taken sides, some supporting Harry as a modernizer and rebel, others condemning him as reckless and self-serving. This level of scrutiny only adds pressure to an already volatile situation, amplifying emotions and complicating the path to resolution. And what of Meghan Markle? While she is not the direct target of this legal action, her influence and involvement cannot be ignored. Allegedly, she has played a strategic role in some of Harry's decisions, whether by counsel, support, or encouragement. The public has long debated her impact on the royal family, and now, in light of these legal developments, those debates have intensified. Was she a partner in strategy, a shield, or an instigator? The answer remains unclear, but the implications are significant. But the story gets even more intricate. Reports indicate that the legal action is not a simple filing. It is part of a multi-layered strategy. This includes attempts to secure evidence, manage public perception, and prepare for potential courtroom battles that could set precedent for how the monarchy handles internal disputes in the future. Legal experts consulted by insiders suggest that this could be one of the most consequential actions the monarchy has undertaken in decades. So why should you care? Why does this matter beyond the palace walls? Because it is a rare glimpse into the intersection of family, power, and law at the highest levels. It reveals that even institutions as old and revered as the British monarchy are not immune to personal conflict, betrayal, and the consequences of decisions made behind closed doors. It challenges our assumptions about loyalty, love, and the responsibilities of legacy. And it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What happens when personal relationships collide with duty? How far will a father go to protect his kingdom and his principles, even if it means confronting his own child? As we prepare to explore the chapters ahead, keep these questions in mind. Each revelation, each twist, each hidden detail adds layers to an already complex story. You will witness the tension, the strategy, and the human emotions that underpin this historic confrontation. You will see moments of shock, disbelief, and unexpected insight. And you will come to understand that in this tale, nothing is as simple as it seems. And now, the mini cliffhanger that will lead us into the first chapter. Behind the doors of the palace, in rooms rarely seen by the public, there was a moment when King Charles discovered something that changed everything. Something that left him no choice but to act. And what came next would change the course of the royal family's history forever, and no one saw it coming. What could possibly push a father, one who has devoted decades to guiding, protecting, and mentoring his son, to the brink of legal action? What unseen betrayal had stacked so high that King Charles, a man known for patience and restraint, decided it was time to stop waiting, to stop hoping, and to take a step no one imagined? It started with a letter, a single envelope, discreetly placed on a mahogany desk in one of the palace's rarely used private rooms. The handwriting was unmistakable, the signature left no doubt. But the contents inside were explosive. Insiders say that for hours, the king sat alone, reading and rereading the pages, his face alternately pale, then flushed, then hardened into an expression of rare decisiveness. This was not just another disagreement over protocol or minor scandal. This was a line crossed, a rupture in trust so deep that reconciliation seemed impossible. The letter revealed things that had long been suspected, but never confirmed. It detailed communications, alleged financial missteps, and decisions made in secret, without consultation or consideration of the royal family's interests. Some claims were mundane, procedural, almost trivial, but others were damning. Evidence of bypassing security protocols, ignoring legal obligations, and even hints of actions that could constitute criminal violations were all there, neatly documented. And the truth, cold and stark, was laid bare. The king's own son had not merely acted independently. He had allegedly acted against the very institution that raised him. You might ask, was this just a father overreacting to adolescent rebellion turned adult recklessness? Or was it truly something that demanded immediate intervention? Imagine the emotional complexity. On one hand, there is Charles, a man who has spent his life balancing the responsibilities of a monarchy with the realities of parenthood. He has faced rebellion before, from peers, advisors, and even his own household staff. But this was a son, a boy he had raised, now grown, making choices that potentially threatened legacy, reputation, and security. And what about Harry? To the public, he had been the picture of modern royalty. Independent, outspoken, sometimes defiant, but always with a veneer of charm and relatability. Millions followed his life online, cheered him on during public appearances, and sympathized with his struggles. But behind the scenes, insiders reveal a very different story. Meetings postponed, directives ignored, palace staff kept in the dark, and private communications that contradicted every public statement he made. Every act compounded frustration until the pile became too large to ignore. The palace staff, those who have long been trained to manage the delicate balance of privacy, protocol, and family loyalty, were on edge. Whispers circulated in corridors. Couriers delivered notes in secrecy. Every phone call seemed coded, every meeting urgent. And yet, they knew that none of this could fully capture the emotional weight of the situation. When a father contemplates legal action against his own child, every fact, every rumor, every small transgression becomes magnified. It's not just law, it's deeply personal. Sources close to the palace hint at meetings that lasted late into the night, often in rooms with no windows, where advisors, lawyers, and family aides debated options, strategy, and potential consequences. Each scenario considered multiple outcomes: media backlash, public sympathy for Harry, potential financial damage, and the effect on the monarchy's reputation globally. And through all of this, Charles remained remarkably measured. But inside, the storm was building. Imagine the tension in those moments. A king, surrounded by counsel and advisors, weighing the consequences of pursuing his own son in court. Each document examined, each precedent reviewed, each risk carefully analyzed. Some argued for delay, for negotiation, for quiet resolution. Others urged immediate action, citing legal imperatives and the need to send a clear message. And then there was the personal voice, the father's instinct, raw and undeniable, saying that enough was enough. At the heart of this conflict was more than protocol. It was a breach of trust, a betrayal not of the crown, but of family. Letters, emails, and private messages allegedly detailed decisions Harry made that not only circumvented family counsel, but also deliberately undermined it. Some of these choices were financial, mismanagement of funds, questionable transactions, and investments that raised eyebrows even among seasoned advisors. Others were strategic, affecting public engagements, media narratives, and diplomatic relations. But perhaps the most painful were the personal betrayals, the actions that disregarded the emotional bonds that had once seemed unbreakable. And yet, contradictions abound. Publicly, Harry maintained a persona of transparency and honesty, speaking openly about his struggles, his vision, and his intent to carve out a life beyond the traditional royal mold. Privately, insiders claim he took actions that were secretive, calculated, and at times deceptive. How does one reconcile these conflicting realities? How could a son present himself as forthright while allegedly undermining his family's trust behind closed doors? These contradictions, these dual narratives, created a tension that was impossible for Charles to ignore. The breaking point came when evidence surfaced of communications that were not just strategic missteps, but deliberate maneuvers that some consider potentially criminal. Whether or not these allegations hold in a court of law is another matter, but to the father, the perception was devastating. How could he have raised a son, educated him in the ways of responsibility and duty, only to have him disregard everything in pursuit of personal goals. Directly after reviewing the letter, the king summoned his closest advisors, lawyers, and private aides. The conversation was described as intense, urgent, and at times emotionally charged. Some insiders report that phrases like, "I cannot ignore this," and "this is beyond personal grievance, it is institutional risk," were repeated throughout. Every angle was analyzed: the legal ramifications, the media strategy, the potential for public backlash, and the internal family fallout. And then there was the question of timing. Why act now, after years of tension? Sources suggest that the discovery of one specific piece of evidence, a document, a recording, or a financial ledger, was the catalyst. This was the moment the king realized that private intervention, negotiation, and quiet persuasion were no longer sufficient. The stakes had risen too high, the risk too tangible. Immediate legal action was not just a choice, it became an imperative. The palace, however, is no ordinary household. Every action is scrutinized, every word reported. How would the public react to a father suing his son? How would global media frame this unprecedented scenario? And what about the monarchy's image? Charles knew that the world would dissect this action frame by frame, word by word. The balance of personal loyalty and institutional duty was razor-thin. One wrong move could have ramifications not just for Harry, but for the future of the entire royal family. Imagine Harry receiving the notice, if he hasn't already. The shock, the disbelief, the possible sense of betrayal. Did he anticipate this level of response from a father he thought he could reason with? Did he consider that actions he believed were justified, even righteous, could provoke a response of this magnitude? The emotional weight is almost unimaginable. And yet, despite the gravity, there are hints of irony. For years, Harry had portrayed himself as independent, free from constraints, capable of managing his own life and public image. Yet here he stands, or potentially will stand, on the precipice of a legal battle with the very father he once revered. The son who sought freedom may find himself ensnared in a conflict that he cannot escape. Audience, ask yourself, how would you feel if your parent, someone you trusted above all else, suddenly took the ultimate step to hold you accountable? Would you be angry, hurt, defiant? Or would you understand that some lines, once crossed, demand consequences no matter how painful? And here is the final, chilling twist of this breaking point. Insiders hint that the king did not make this decision lightly. This was not a knee-jerk reaction. It was the result of careful deliberation, of sleepless nights, and of a painful recognition that familial loyalty does not excuse actions that threaten both the personal and the institutional integrity of the monarchy. And now, as the palace braces for the fallout, one question looms larger than ever. How will Harry respond when confronted with the reality of his father's decision? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a father and son, once inseparable, begin to drift apart so far that the bond seems irreparable? How does a relationship built on decades of shared history, trust, and love turn into a tense chess game where every word, gesture, and glance is measured, calculated, and potentially weaponized? The story of King Charles and Prince Harry is no ordinary family conflict. It is a rift that spans generations, a clash of tradition and modernity, and a deeply personal struggle that has now erupted into public spectacle. The roots of this rift go back years, long before the current legal showdown. Charles, a man raised with the weight of royal expectation pressing on every decision, has always believed in the balance of duty and compassion. His parenting style, shaped by tradition, the pressures of monarchy, and personal experience, emphasized loyalty, responsibility, and respect for the institution. Harry, by contrast, grew up with a mixture of privilege and intense scrutiny. Every misstep was magnified, every success dissected, and every rebellion noticed. From an early age, the son sought ways to assert independence, often clashing with the expectations imposed upon him. At first, these clashes were subtle. Arguments over trivial matters, curfews, appearances, school obligations, gradually escalated into deeper disagreements over identity, responsibility, and autonomy. Harry's desire to break free from the rigid structures of royal life was not inherently negative, but his methods, his secrecy, and his increasingly public defiance created tension. Those around them could sense it. Staff whispered in hallways. Close friends noticed the growing distance, and royal aides feared that the friction would only worsen over time. Then came Meghan Markle. While her entrance into Harry's life was celebrated by many as a love story, it introduced a new dynamic into an already delicate relationship. Charles, cautious and observant, reportedly saw shifts in Harry's behavior. The prince, once deferential in private counsel, became more assertive, sometimes dismissive. Decisions that once would have been discussed in confidence began to be taken independently, often influenced or encouraged by Meghan. Some insiders suggest this was a natural evolution of partnership. Others view it as a catalyst, accelerating a rift that might have otherwise remained manageable. The emotional undercurrents were profound. A father witnessing his son make choices he could neither influence nor endorse experiences a unique type of anguish. It's not simply disappointment. It is a mix of frustration, sadness, fear, and, in some cases, rage. Charles reportedly struggled with balancing his role as monarch and as parent, trying to reconcile his duty to the crown with his desire to protect his son. Yet, every step Harry took toward independence seemed to widen the gap, leaving Charles feeling increasingly powerless. The palace became a microcosm of this conflict. Staff who once moved fluidly between royal duties and personal interactions now found themselves navigating an emotional minefield. Every meeting, every conversation, was fraught with tension. Couriers delivered confidential notes with a sense of urgency. Meetings were scheduled behind locked doors and subtle signals. A raised eyebrow, a delayed reply, a hesitant glance were interpreted as evidence of allegiance or defiance. The atmosphere became thick with unspoken conflict. A key factor in this rift was communication, or the lack thereof. Charles, operating from a framework of formality, expected his son to consult and confide. Harry, increasingly confident in his own judgment, began to prioritize his vision, sometimes withholding details to maintain autonomy. This lack of alignment led to misunderstandings, frustration, and a sense of betrayal on both sides. Staff who tried to mediate often found themselves caught in the crossfire, aware that every word could tip the balance. Every disclosure could inflame tempers. Public perception only added fuel to the fire. Harry's interviews, his media presence, and his philanthropic initiatives were widely covered. To the outside world, he was progressive, relatable, and principled. But within the palace, the story was different. Advisors worried that his public statements contradicted private agreements, created expectations the family could not fulfill, and further strained the already fragile bond. How could Charles guide, correct, or discipline a son whose actions were amplified by the global media? Yet there were moments of tenderness amidst the tension. Observers describe rare encounters where father and son shared laughter, reminiscences, or private conversations that revealed glimpses of the bond they once had. Charles would remind Harry of lessons learned. Harry would express admiration or gratitude for guidance. But these moments were fleeting, fragile, and often followed by renewed tension when disagreements resurfaced. The emotional seesaw of pride and disappointment, hope and frustration, played out repeatedly, eroding trust over time. The rift widened further due to divergent values and priorities. Charles's life, steeped in duty, legacy, and long-term considerations, contrasted sharply with Harry's desire for autonomy, personal fulfillment, and modernized principles of visibility and advocacy. What Charles viewed as reckless or impulsive, Harry viewed as courageous or necessary. What Charles saw as betrayal, Harry interpreted as independence. These differing worldviews created a feedback loop, intensifying every disagreement, magnifying every slight, and amplifying every perception of disloyalty. And then there were the subtle, almost invisible acts that fueled the divide. A canceled meeting here, a postponed call there, a decision made without consultation. Each small act might seem insignificant in isolation, but collectively they painted a pattern of disregard, one that Charles reportedly could not ignore. The emotional toll of these small betrayals is often underestimated, but insiders emphasize that it is precisely these repeated slights that lead to the breaking point. We must also consider the psychological dimension. Charles, aware of the intense scrutiny under which he lives, experiences pressure that few outsiders can comprehend. Every action he takes is dissected, every choice judged. In such an environment, personal betrayal carries amplified consequences. When combined with legal and institutional responsibilities, the emotional strain becomes unbearable. For Harry, the pressure of public expectation, personal ambition, and the desire to maintain his image likewise created a complex web of stress and emotional tension. What is particularly striking in this narrative is the duality of public perception versus private reality. To the world, the rift might appear dramatic but understandable, a son seeking independence from a traditional father. Yet within the palace, the rift is multi-layered, involving trust, duty, legal obligations, financial oversight, and personal values. Every decision carries both personal and institutional weight, and as the rift deepened, the inevitability of confrontation became clear to all insiders. A tipping point was approaching, and when it arrived, there would be no turning back. That tipping point, according to multiple sources, involved not just communications and minor breaches of protocol, but a convergence of actions that collectively represented a perceived threat to the monarchy's integrity. Whether it was unilateral decisions on public engagements, media narratives that contradicted palace strategy, or financial arrangements that bypassed advisory oversight, the cumulative effect painted a picture of defiance, disregard, and, to the king, betrayal. And yet, within this tension lies the human element, the love, the history, the shared memories. Charles remembers the boy who once ran through palace gardens, full of energy, curiosity, and humor. Harry remembers a father who guided him, sometimes sternly, sometimes gently, but always with intention. Those memories, precious yet fraught with pain, only deepen the emotional stakes. How does one pursue justice, accountability, or consequence against someone they love so deeply? Directly addressing the audience, imagine being in Charles's position. Every action your child takes is public, scrutinized, debated. Every word misinterpreted, every decision magnified. You are expected to remain composed, rational, measured. But inside, the sense of betrayal, frustration, and fear churns. How far would you go? What line would you not allow your child to cross? And at what point do private interventions fail, leaving only the legal route? As the rift widened, the palace prepared for the inevitable. Advisors discussed scenarios that once seemed improbable: legal filings, media management, potential arrests, and public reactions. The stakes were enormous, not just for Harry, not just for Charles, but for the institution itself. Every decision would ripple outward, influencing public trust, family cohesion, and even international perception. The tension was electric, palpable, unavoidable. And here is the final, chilling element. Insiders report that within the royal circle, some believed reconciliation was possible, while others argued that the line had been crossed irreparably. Arguments erupted behind closed doors, strategies debated, and for the first time, the sense of inevitability settled over everyone involved. A confrontation was coming, legal or otherwise. And the moment when Charles finally decided to act, when the letter, the evidence, and the emotional calculus converged, marked a seismic shift in the family dynamic. But what was discovered next would ignite the spark that turned tension into action, and the world would soon be watching an unprecedented father versus son showdown unfold. What if the secrets you trusted to remain hidden for decades suddenly surfaced, threatening to unravel everything you thought was untouchable? What if documents, recordings, and private communications, meant only for a select few, were suddenly thrust into the center of a father-son conflict with the weight of a global audience watching? For King Charles and Prince Harry, that scenario became a stark reality, one that pushed their already fragile relationship to the breaking point. It began subtly, as these things often do. A file left on a desk, an email inadvertently forwarded to the wrong recipient. The palace staff, trained for discretion, noticed anomalies, missing documents, unusually encrypted messages, encrypted hard drives moved into secure storage without clear purpose. For Charles, this raised alarm bells. The king, who had spent a lifetime guarding the integrity of the monarchy and its reputation, could sense that something significant was at play. Then came the leaks. Not the casual leaks that occasionally make headlines, These were carefully orchestrated, timed, and precise. Multiple insiders reported that files containing internal communications, sensitive legal documents, and personal correspondences were circulating in ways that no one could fully track. The information was damning. Some documents detailed financial decisions made unilaterally by Harry. Others suggested intentional misrepresentation of facts to external parties. A few hinted at personal decisions that, while private, had implications that the monarchy could not ignore. Imagine being Charles in that moment. You are aware of every nuance, every implication, and every potential outcome. These leaks were not just embarrassing, they were threatening. They painted a portrait of a son acting outside the bounds of familial and institutional trust. And the betrayal, insiders say, cut deeply because it wasn't hypothetical. Every document was real, every recording authentic, every secret exposed. It wasn't just about legalities, it was personal. Among the most explosive revelations were emails allegedly exchanged between Harry and external advisors who had no official role within the royal framework. Some of these communications contradicted his public statements. Others revealed planning that bypassed traditional protocols, and some hinted at financial arrangements that skirted the oversight of legal advisors. Charles reportedly spent hours reviewing each item, often pausing in disbelief at the audacity and scale of what had been hidden. Leaked audio recordings added a new layer of shock. Conversations once thought private were now exposed, revealing tension, disagreements, and at times, manipulation. In some cases, Harry's tone, choices, and words appeared calculated, precise, and, insiders say, intentionally provocative. The recordings suggested that he knew certain actions would push boundaries, test loyalties, and perhaps provoke reactions from those around him. The psychological dimension of this was clear. The leaks weren't accidental. They were a symptom of a larger strategy, a pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. Direct audience question. Imagine your most private words, thoughts, and strategies being made public. How would you respond if every action you took, every decision, every conversation were dissected, debated, and used against you? For Harry, the stakes were monumental, both personally and publicly. For Charles, the realization was equally staggering. His son's actions were no longer contained. They were out in the open, and the consequences could ripple through generations. The palace's legal team immediately sprang into action. Their job was twofold. First, to assess the authenticity and implications of the leaked documents. Second, to determine the legal framework within which Charles could respond. It was unprecedented. Royal Legal Counsel typically manages public relations, estate matters, and ceremonial obligations. Rarely, if ever, do they navigate the intersection of family betrayal, leaked communications, and potential criminal exposure. And now, the team faced an unparalleled challenge: how to protect the monarchy while addressing a personal and familial betrayal of extraordinary magnitude. Complicating matters further was the public perception. Once leaks go public, the narrative is no longer controlled by the palace. Media outlets, social media platforms, and global audiences immediately seize on fragments, amplifying them, twisting them, and speculating. The challenge for Charles was enormous. Not only did he have to manage legal and personal fallout internally, but he also had to consider how these leaks would be received by a world already invested in Harry's public persona. Every move had to be calculated, measured, and strategically sound. Some of the leaks were relatively mundane: scheduling conflicts, minor disagreements, and logistical errors. But hidden among them were revelations with far-reaching implications. One document allegedly detailed a financial arrangement that bypassed standard approval channels. Another included communications with advisors outside the royal circle that suggested strategic positioning, potentially undermining the authority of Charles and other senior family members. And then there were personal correspondences that revealed emotional manipulation, selective disclosure of information, and attempts to sway decisions in ways that could compromise both familial and institutional integrity. Emotional beats played a significant role here. For Charles, discovering these leaks was not merely a breach of protocol. It was a violation of trust. A father's instinct is to protect, guide, and nurture. What he faced instead was evidence suggesting his son had been acting without regard for guidance or consequence. The emotional weight was compounded by public scrutiny, which meant that every decision he made now carried immediate visibility and judgment. How do you balance love with accountability when the world is watching? The palace staff, too, felt the tension. Leaks create paranoia, uncertainty, and division. Staff members were asked to sign additional confidentiality agreements. Meetings became more secretive, and every document movement was logged with unprecedented scrutiny. Even those closest to Charles reportedly experienced sleepless nights, knowing that a single misstep could exacerbate an already volatile situation. And yet, the king remained resolute, understanding that action was necessary not only to address the leaks, but also to reassert control over the family dynamic and protect the monarchy's reputation. Direct audience question: have you ever discovered that someone you trusted had hidden critical information from you? How would you react if those secrets threatened not only your relationship, but also the reputation and security of everyone around you? This is the human drama at the heart of the royal conflict, a story of betrayal, secrecy, and the inevitable consequences of hidden actions. One of the most shocking elements was the speed and precision of the leaks. For months, insiders say, Harry's actions had gone unnoticed or were underestimated. Then, almost suddenly, a cascade of documents, audio recordings, and private notes surfaced. It was not random, it appeared strategic. The leaks hit at a time when Charles was already managing other royal obligations, amplifying the stress and increasing the urgency to act. The timing, many argue, was intentional, adding pressure, creating uncertainty, and challenging the king's capacity to respond effectively. Legal experts inside the palace reportedly described the situation as a perfect storm. The combination of private communications, leaked files, potential financial discrepancies, and public visibility created a scenario in which inaction could be as dangerous as action. Charles, aware of the historical precedent, understood that failing to respond could signal weakness, not just to his son but to the public, advisors, and international allies. Every hour of delay increased the risk of reputational damage and institutional instability. And then came the realization that would mark the turning point. The leaks contained evidence that could potentially justify immediate legal action. While some details are confidential, sources suggest that this evidence involved decisions and actions that, if confirmed, could be considered breaches of legal obligations, financial mismanagement, or even conduct that might be subject to prosecution under certain circumstances. The implication was clear. The father who had tried patience, dialogue, and private mediation now had grounds, perhaps unavoidable grounds, to escalate the situation formally. The palace was reportedly divided. Some advisors urged caution, fearing the optics of a father taking legal action against his son. Others insisted that the evidence left no choice, that inaction would embolden further disregard for royal protocol, and that swift, decisive measures were necessary. Amidst the debate, Charles reportedly remained focused, weighing the evidence, the risks, and the potential outcomes with meticulous care. Audience engagement. If you were in the king's position, what would you do? Would you confront the leaks quietly, attempt negotiation, or escalate to formal legal action? And what if the person responsible was your own child, someone you love beyond measure? These are the questions at the heart of this royal saga, a test of love, authority, and the limits of familial loyalty. As the legal framework took shape and the palace braced for potential public exposure, Charles made a crucial decision. The rift would no longer be managed privately. The evidence demanded action. The stakes were too high, and the consequences of inaction were too severe. The decision to proceed with legal action against Harry, a son he once cherished above all else, was set into motion. But what came next would shock the palace staff, advisors, and the world alike. A revelation buried within the files that changed the stakes entirely and forced King Charles to confront the unthinkable. Could you imagine the weight of picking up a legal document and realizing it is addressed to your own child? Not a distant relative, not an estranged cousin, but your own son, the one you held, guided, and loved unconditionally. For King Charles, that moment arrived in the form of a filing that would shake the palace to its core and reverberate across the globe. The legal hammer was about to fall, and the world would soon witness an unprecedented confrontation between father and son. The decision to proceed with legal action was not impulsive. For months, advisors, lawyers, and trusted confidants debated the merits, the timing, and the potential fallout. They analyzed the evidence meticulously, leaked files, recordings, letters, and private correspondences that painted a picture of disobedience, deception, and betrayal. Every angle was scrutinized. What were the legal implications? Could the monarchy enforce accountability without igniting a public relations nightmare? How could they protect the institution while addressing personal betrayal? When Charles made the final call, he knew the stakes were enormous. A lawsuit against a family member is always messy. But when that family member is a prince, a globally recognized figure, and the son of a reigning monarch, the complexity skyrockets. Legal experts reportedly described the situation as one of the most intricate in recent royal history, a combination of private law, public perception, international attention, and media frenzy. Charles had to balance justice, protection of the monarchy, and the emotional weight of confronting his own child. The document itself was formal, precise, and meticulously drafted. Every clause, every sentence, every paragraph was calculated to address not only the immediate legal issue, but also to anticipate potential defenses. Sources suggest it included references to fiduciary obligations, adherence to protocol, and the consequences of circumventing established channels. Legal teams within the palace reportedly spent hours refining the language, ensuring clarity and enforceability, while also considering the broader public perception of the action. At the heart of the legal filing was a simple, devastating premise. Certain actions taken by Harry, individually and in collaboration with outside parties, allegedly violated both legal and familial obligations. The filing sought not just restitution or correction, but accountability, transparency, and adherence to the standards expected of a royal family member. It was, in effect, a declaration that personal ties, while deeply valued, do not supersede responsibility or consequences. The moment the document was ready to be delivered, tension in the palace reached unprecedented levels. Staff members, who had long navigated the delicate balance of confidentiality and duty, were on edge. Couriers moved carefully through hallways, aides whispered in hushed tones, and advisors prepared for the inevitable public fallout. Every movement was scrutinized, every step planned. The weight of history pressed down. Never before had a reigning monarch taken legal action against a son in such a high-profile, globally visible way. The decision to deliver the filing was fraught with emotional turmoil. Charles reportedly paused before signing, reflecting on the implications for their relationship, the monarchy, and the public perception of both. Could he, a father, initiate legal proceedings against someone he loved unconditionally? Could he justify it to the world, to his advisors, and to the monarchy itself? Yet, the evidence was clear. The breaches, the secrecy, and the cumulative decisions left him with no choice. Accountability demanded action. Once the filing was served, the world immediately reacted. Media outlets around the globe splashed headlines. Monarch takes legal action against son. Prince faces court battle with father. Royal family in crisis. Social media erupted. Fans, critics, and global audiences debated fiercely. How could a father bring his own son to court? Was this justice or a display of royal power? The public frenzy added yet another layer of pressure, intensifying the scrutiny and magnifying every possible consequence. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was tense and strained. Advisors briefed the king on potential scenarios. Harry's legal team would counter, public statements could contradict private evidence, and international media would dissect every word. Every move required careful calculation. But Charles, sources say, remained resolute. He had weighed personal emotion against duty and determined that action was necessary. The integrity of the monarchy, the precedent for future conduct, and the protection of family interests all demanded this course. Harry's reaction, while initially private, was reportedly one of shock and disbelief. Some insiders claim he anticipated disagreements, perhaps even some formal rebukes, but not the severity of legal action. The confrontation forced him into a position no son ever wants, defending himself against the very parent who shaped his life. And while public appearances would continue to maintain an air of composure, Private discussions within the palace reportedly contained heated arguments, emotional appeals, and pleas for reconsideration. Audience, consider this. What would you feel if confronted with legal action from someone you trust the most? Could love survive accountability? How would you navigate the tension between personal relationships and professional obligations, when the stakes are both emotional and institutional? These are the questions that define this unprecedented royal crisis. Legal experts suggest that the filing was strategically designed to compel action, not merely provoke conflict. Charles's team anticipated defenses, potential delays, and counterclaims. They also planned for public relations management, ensuring that the monarchy's messaging emphasized responsibility, duty, and the extraordinary nature of the situation. Every step reflected not just legal strategy, but emotional intelligence, a delicate balance of firmness and respect for familial ties. The palace was reportedly divided on how to handle communications. Some advocated for transparency, releasing limited information to control the narrative. Others urged discretion, keeping the process confidential to protect both the monarchy and Harry. In the end, the decision leaned toward controlled disclosure, a brief acknowledgement sufficient to frame the narrative without exposing all details prematurely. The careful choreography reflected awareness that every word, every leak, could ignite speculation or inflame emotions further. Meanwhile, Harry's allies reportedly scrambled to understand the scope of the legal action. Advisors, friends, and legal representatives analyzed every clause, every reference, every potential angle. Strategy meetings stretched late into the night. Every possible defense was considered, and every historical precedent scrutinized. Some suggested negotiation, others recommended public statements, and a few urged direct challenge. The tension was palpable. The son, once free to act as he wished, now faced the full weight of both the law and his father's authority. The emotional stakes were profound. For Charles, it was a moment of immense pain, tempered by the belief that accountability was necessary. For Harry, it was a collision of personal history, public scrutiny, and legal jeopardy. And for the palace staff, the advisors, and the monarchy itself, it was a test of resilience, discretion, and strategic thinking. How would this unprecedented legal battle shape the perception of the royal family? How would it influence public trust? And most importantly, how would it affect the relationship between father and son moving forward? Directly addressing the audience, imagine the emotional strain of issuing a legal summons to your child, knowing that every move will be scrutinized worldwide, every reaction dissected, and every step judged. Could you separate personal emotion from duty? Could you act decisively while preserving love, respect, and family bonds? These are the dilemmas at the heart of this story, the emotional engines driving the tension, suspense, and intrigue. And as the filing went into motion, one detail emerged that would heighten the drama even further. Hidden within the documents was a revelation that neither Harry nor the public anticipated, something that escalated the stakes beyond legalities, turning a courtroom dispute into a confrontation with potentially life-altering consequences. It was a detail that would set the tone for every subsequent interaction, every strategy session, and every media analysis in the days, weeks, and months to come. But what came next would turn this legal confrontation into a global spectacle, and the revelation buried within those filings would leave the palace, the advisors, and Harry himself scrambling for answers. Who do you turn to when the very person you trusted to guide you becomes the source of your greatest fear? When the stakes are higher than anyone could imagine, the question of allies and betrayers becomes more than political strategy. It becomes personal, emotional, and devastating. For King Charles and Prince Harry, the unfolding legal conflict magnified these questions, exposing loyalties, testing friendships, and revealing unexpected betrayals that cut deeper than any legal document ever could. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was tense. Every advisor, aide, and confidant knew the situation's gravity. Whispers spread through corridors, meetings were held in small, locked rooms, and every conversation was laden with caution. Who could be trusted? Who would remain loyal when the conflict escalated beyond the private realm and into the global spotlight? Every interaction was under scrutiny, and every minor choice had the potential to shift allegiances or spark scandal. Charles, despite the emotional weight of the situation, approached this delicate web with strategic precision. He knew that allies could be the difference between a successful resolution and public disaster. Some advisors had been with the family for decades, their loyalty unquestioned, their understanding of palace politics unmatched. They provided counsel on strategy, messaging, and procedural steps. But even the most trusted aides had their limits. When personal feelings collided with professional duties, lines blurred, and the potential for missteps increased exponentially. Meanwhile, Harry's circle of allies came into focus. Supporters outside the palace, legal advisors, public relations consultants, and sympathetic figures mobilized quickly, offering guidance, media strategy, and legal analysis. Insiders suggest that Harry's team worked in near secrecy, coordinating efforts across countries and jurisdictions. Their goal was to protect him from the consequences of the filings while managing the public narrative in a way that could mitigate reputational damage. Yet, even here, cracks appeared. Differences of opinion, conflicting strategies, and the high-pressure environment created tension within the very group meant to shield him. Inside the palace, some aides were reportedly caught in ethical dilemmas. Do you remain loyal to the institution and the king, or do you show empathy toward the son, whose humanity, vulnerability, and struggle are impossible to ignore? Sources describe staff walking the line carefully, attempting to balance duty and compassion, while also aware that missteps could have lasting repercussions. Every whisper, every note, every discreet piece of advice was scrutinized for intent. Even minor deviations could be interpreted as betrayal. And then there were the unexpected betrayals. One of the most striking elements of this chapter in the royal drama was the discovery of individuals within the inner circle who were allegedly leaking information to Harry's team. Advisors who once presented themselves as neutral were now suspected of providing insights into Charles's legal strategy, palace security protocols, and potential vulnerabilities. The betrayal was not merely procedural, it was deeply personal. To Charles, these actions were a breach of trust at a level that compounded the existing emotional strain of the legal confrontation. Direct audience question. If someone you trusted implicitly betrayed you at a critical moment, how would you respond? Could you maintain composure while recalibrating strategy? And in a family as scrutinized as the royal family, where personal betrayal is amplified by public attention, what options remain when trust is shattered? On Harry's side, alliances were equally complex. Support came not just from family allies, but from legal experts, PR consultants, and even sympathetic public figures who could influence perception and media narratives. Yet, these alliances were fragile. Conflicting advice, overzealous strategists, and the inherent unpredictability of public opinion created a volatile environment. One misstep, a leaked memo, a poorly timed statement, an inadvertent revelation, could turn allies into liabilities and compromise the broader defense. The tension between allies and betrayers was amplified by emotion. Loyalty is tested most under pressure, and the immense public scrutiny magnified every decision. Charles's advisors reportedly experienced sleepless nights, anticipating leaks, miscommunications, or public fallout. Harry's supporters were equally stressed, navigating legal complexities, personal dynamics, and media scrutiny. The emotional intensity was palpable, creating an environment where misjudgments could have enormous consequences. Insiders report moments of dramatic revelation. In one instance, a trusted aide allegedly disclosed information intended to assist Charles, only for it to be intercepted and shared with Harry's team. The resulting cascade of consequences forced palace security, legal teams, and senior advisors to implement new protocols almost immediately. The breach highlighted the fragility of trust within an institution designed to maintain control, secrecy, and hierarchy. Adding further complexity were conflicting motivations among family members. Some relatives reportedly sympathized with Harry's position, advocating for reconciliation or private negotiation. Others sided with Charles, emphasizing the importance of accountability, precedent, and institutional integrity. The interplay of personal relationships and political considerations created a labyrinthine web of influence, strategy, and emotional stakes. Every choice had ramifications, every alignment mattered, and every misstep could escalate the conflict. Humor and irony surfaced, too, in unexpected ways. Insiders describe moments where advisors, frustrated by the chaos, joked privately about the surreal nature of a father preparing to sue his son. Laughter, however, was fleeting, a release valve in a pressure cooker of tension. The reality was stark. The monarchy was facing one of the most personal and public crises in modern history, and no one was immune to its emotional weight. Audience engagement. Imagine the stress of navigating relationships where loyalty is constantly questioned, allies may betray, and every action could trigger cascading consequences. How would you decide whom to trust? How would you protect yourself and your family under this kind of relentless scrutiny? These are the dilemmas facing both Charles and Harry as the legal and emotional battle unfolds. The emotional stakes reached new heights when reports emerged of confidential communications being selectively shared by allies, sometimes without full context, sometimes in ways that heightened tension rather than alleviating it. Insiders say this created misunderstandings, fueled paranoia, and magnified the sense of urgency. Charles, already burdened by the responsibility of protecting the monarchy and navigating the emotional landscape of a father confronting a son, now had to consider every ally's potential motivations. The complexity of the situation was further compounded by the interplay between personal loyalty and public perception. Allies who remained neutral in private were publicly perceived as taking sides. Those who acted in the king's interest behind closed doors were sometimes misinterpreted by Harry's team as obstructive or adversarial. The palace, sources say, became a battlefield of whispers, strategy, and subtle maneuvers, with every move scrutinized by insiders and observers alike. And then came the shocking revelation that changed the dynamics entirely. An individual once considered a staunch ally of Charles allegedly collaborated with Harry's team to share insights, creating a vulnerability that could not be ignored. The betrayal was not only procedural, it was deeply personal, a crack in the foundation of trust that the king had relied upon for decades. The implications were clear. In this high-stakes conflict, loyalty could no longer be assumed, and every relationship had to be evaluated anew. The palace staff, legal advisors, and senior family members scrambled to reassess alliances, implement stricter controls, and manage the emerging crisis. Meetings were held around the clock. Communications were encrypted, access to sensitive documents limited, and security measures heightened. The environment was intense, with tension, fear, and emotional strain permeating every interaction. For Charles, this was not merely a legal or institutional challenge. It was an emotional ordeal of the highest order. Directly addressing the audience, consider a situation where those you count on to support you may actually undermine you. How do you navigate it? Who do you trust when every word, every action, every gesture carries enormous stakes? For Charles and Harry, these questions define the unfolding drama, shaping strategy, influencing decisions, and setting the stage for unprecedented confrontation. And as the palace recalibrated, preparing for every eventuality, one thing became clear. The battle lines were drawn not just legally, but emotionally. Allies would be tested, betrayers exposed, and loyalties would shift in ways that no one could predict. And in the midst of this turmoil, a revelation surfaced, a twist so unexpected that it threatened to upend both strategy and perception, forcing every player in this royal drama to confront the unimaginable. But what came next would reveal a truth so explosive, so destabilizing, that it left the monarchy, advisors, and even Harry himself scrambling for answers, and it would set the stage for the next phase of the confrontation. Money is power. Money is influence. Money is often the silent force behind family conflict, especially when the stakes involve one of the wealthiest and most scrutinized families in the world. For King Charles and Prince Harry, the legal confrontation wasn't just about trust or personal betrayal. It was intertwined with financial decisions, inheritance disputes, and funds that had long been considered sacrosanct. What the world would soon learn is that the fallout from financial maneuvers could be as devastating as any personal betrayal. It began quietly, the way financial crises often do. A review of accounts by palace accountants revealed irregularities, small, at first, barely noticeable. Transactions that should have been approved through official channels were processed differently. Allocations that were routine suddenly redirected, and expenditures that raised questions about oversight and responsibility. Each anomaly seemed minor in isolation. But, as advisors dug deeper, a pattern emerged, painting a portrait of unilateral decision-making that bypassed standard approvals. Imagine Charles receiving that report. A lifetime of managing wealth, protecting assets, and ensuring the monarchy's financial stability suddenly collided with evidence suggesting that his own son had, intentionally or not, skirted oversight. The emotional impact was severe. Financial mismanagement, in this context, isn't just numbers on a balance sheet. It's a challenge to authority, trust, and legacy. Every pound, every transaction, becomes a statement about control, loyalty, and responsibility. The documents revealed transfers to accounts previously